The conference room on the 42nd floor smelled like leather and something older, the particular staleness of a room where men have made decisions about other men's lives for decades. I sat at the far end of the table, in the chair closest to the window, and looked out at the Chicago skyline, while my father-in-law told his board of directors that the company needed fresh leadership with the right pedigree. He didn't look at me once. I've thought about that moment more times than I can count in the 38 years since. Not with bitterness, exactly. More like you'd think about a photograph of yourself when you were young. Studying it, trying to understand who that person was and why he made the choices he made. My name is Thomas Aldridge. I'm 64 years old. I retired from public life 11 years ago, and I spend most of my mornings now walking the 2 miles down to Lake Michigan with my wife and our retriever, a ridiculous animal named Bucket, who has never once in his life walked in a straight line. We live in a house that has 3 bedrooms and a leaky gutter on the north side that I keep meaning to fix. My car is a 2009 Subaru with a crack in the passenger side mirror. Nobody who passes me on the street would guess that I own 39% of Caldwell Medical Holdings, a private hospital network with 17 facilities across the Midwest that, at last valuation, was worth approximately $1.8 billion. My father-in-law built it. His name is Leonard Caldwell. He is 79 years old, still sharp, still mean in the way that only certain kinds of successful men are mean. Not cruel exactly, but dismissive. The way a man is dismissive when he has spent 60 years having the world confirm that his instincts about people are correct. His instincts about me were not correct. I met his daughter in the spring of 1986. I was 26. She was 23. We met at a community blood drive in Evanston, Illinois, of all places. She'd come with a friend. I'd come because my coworker guilted me into it. And we ended up sitting next to each other in folding chairs with juice boxes afterward. Both of us a little pale. Her name was Judith. She had a laugh that started quiet and then surprised her, like she'd meant to hold it back and couldn't. I knew in the way you sometimes know things, not slowly and logically, but all at once, like a door opening. We dated for 2 years. Judith told me early on that her family had money, significant money. But she said it the way people say things they're slightly embarrassed about. She drove a used Honda. She worked as a pediatric nurse at Northwestern Memorial. She brought her lunch in a paper bag. Her father, when I finally met him, wore a suit that cost more than my monthly rent and shook my hand the way you'd shake the hand of a man applying to fix your plumbing. "What is it you do again?" he asked. "Biomedical investments," I said. He nodded with the particular expression of a man who has already stopped listening. "And your family is from?" "Peoria," I said. "My father was a high school shop teacher." Something flickered across his face. Not contempt. He was too controlled for contempt. Just a kind of quiet filing away. I had been categorized. The file was thin. Judith and I were married in October of 1988. Her father paid for a large wedding that I didn't want and wasn't asked about. He gave a toast that was gracious on its surface and contained, if you listen carefully, not a single compliment directed at me. He mentioned Judith 4 times. He mentioned his company 3 times. He mentioned me once, to say he hoped I would step up to the responsibilities of this family. My mother cried during the ceremony. She was wearing a dress she'd sewn herself. She'd never been to a wedding with a string quartet before. What Leonard Caldwell did not know, because Judith didn't know, and because I had no reason to tell anyone, was that 3 months before the wedding, I had quietly acquired a 19% stake in Caldwell Medical Holdings through a series of purchases made under a holding company I'd established in 1984. I'd been following Caldwell since my early 20s. The company was undervalued, methodically run, and positioned in a sector that I believed, correctly, as it turned out, was going to see extraordinary growth over the next 3 decades. I put nearly everything I had into it. I want to explain something here because it matters and because it's the thing that people find hardest to understand. I did not hide this from Judith to deceive her. I hid it from everyone because I had learned, early and painfully, that money changes how people treat you. And I had found the one person in the world who treated me exactly as I was. I was terrified. I know how that sounds, but it's true. I was terrified of the moment she found out and looked at me differently. When she looked at me, she saw Thomas. Just Thomas. A man who read history books and burned scrambled eggs and knew every word to every song on Born to Run. I couldn't bear the thought of anything replacing that look. So I said nothing. We built our life. We bought the house in Evanston. We had 2 children, our son James and our daughter Patrice. I went to every school play and every soccer game and every parent-teacher conference. I coached Little League for 6 years despite having the athletic ability of a particularly uncertain golden retriever. Judith worked until the kids were in middle school and then went back part-time. We took 1 vacation a year, always by car, always somewhere with a national park. My father-in-law came to Christmas. He was polite. He was never warm. Over 30 years, I can count on one hand the genuine conversations we had. Every year he found a new way to ask me with exquisite indirectness whether I was providing adequately for his daughter. Meanwhile, over those same 30 years, I continued to acquire Caldwell shares when opportunities presented themselves. By 2018, I held 39%. Leonard held 44%. His son Judith's brother Warren, a man of spectacular incompetence and unearned confidence, held 12%, and various minority shareholders held the rest. I had said nothing to anyone. Not to Judith, not to my attorney beyond the necessary legal work, not to a single person at any of the Christmas dinners or birthday parties or graduations where Leonard Caldwell had looked through me like I was a smudge on a window. The dinner was in March of 2019. Leonard called on a Tuesday and said he wanted the family to come for dinner on Saturday. Just dinner, he said. Casual. He used the word casual twice, which meant, in my experience, that it was not going to be casual. We drove out to Winnetka. Leonard lives in a house on the North Shore that has 7 bedrooms and a back lawn that runs down to a private dock. He bought it in 1979 for what it would cost you to buy a Honda Civic today. My wife grew up in that house. She still gets a particular look when she turns into the driveway, something between love and an old sadness I've never been able to name. Warren was there with his wife. The grandchildren had been sent elsewhere, which confirmed this was not a casual dinner. Leonard's housekeeper served rack of lamb and a 2012 Bordeaux. Leonard sat at the head of the table. He talked about the company for 20 minutes. He talked about the healthcare sector. He talked about the challenges of private hospital networks in the current regulatory environment. He was building toward something, the way he always built toward things, slowly, circling, like a man who has learned that people are more likely to accept what you're about to say if you make them wait long enough. Then he put down his fork and looked at me. "Thomas," he said, "I'll be direct." I waited. I'm 75. Warren is going to take over formal leadership of the company within the next 2 years. I'd like to keep the transition within the family, and I think it would be appropriate, given that you have. He paused with what I recognized as a practice pause. A certain amount of experience adjacent to the industry, for you to come on in a support role. Administrative, something that would let you feel involved. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a job description. Facilities Coordination Manager. The salary listed was $62,000 a year. Judith made a small sound beside me. Warren looked at his wine glass. I picked up the piece of paper and read it carefully. It was a real position, I noted. The kind of position held by someone who schedules boiler maintenance and manages parking garage vendors. I appreciate the thought, I said. It would give you something to do, Leonard said, now that you're, another pause, semi-retired. Something to do? I was 60 years old, and he was offering me something to do. Judith started to say something. I put my hand on hers under the table very gently, and she stopped. Can I have a few days to think about it? I said. Of course, Leonard said, and refilled his wine like the matter was settled. That night, driving home, Judith was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You don't have to do it. I know, I said. He means well, she said. She said this the way she'd said it for 30 years, not as a defense of her father, but as a kind of private grief, the thing she'd made peace with that still cost her something. I know he does, I said, which was not entirely true, but I loved her, so I said it. Monday morning, I called my attorney. His name is Philip, and he has been with me for 22 years, and when I explained what had happened, He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Well, I suppose it's time." I told him what I wanted to do. He said, "Are you sure?" I said yes. He said, "Judith?" I said, "I'll tell her tonight." Philip drafted a letter. It was 4 paragraphs. It was sent by certified mail and also by email to Leonard Caldwell's personal address and to his company's registered legal contact. It identified me by name, identified my holding company, and stated clearly that as a 39% shareholder in Caldwell Medical Holdings, I was formally requesting a shareholder meeting to discuss the proposed leadership transition and certain proposed changes to the company's capital allocation policy. 4 paragraphs, 22 years in the making. I told Judith that evening. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table we'd had for 25 years, and I told her everything. About the holding company, about the shares, about the first purchase in 1984, about watching the company grow for 3.5 decades, about why I'd never said anything. She was very still while I talked. Judith is not a person who makes noise when she's processing something. She goes quiet and you just have to wait. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment. "You bought his company," she said. "I bought shares in his company," I said, "before we met." "Did you know who he was when we met?" "No," I said. "I figured it out about 2 months in. When you mentioned the company name, I almost said something then, and then I didn't." "Why not?" I told her what I told you, about wanting to be just Thomas, about being afraid of losing the only thing that felt real. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "You idiot." I said, "Yes." 30 years, she said. "I know. I would never have." "Thomas, I fell in love with you because you burned eggs and cried at baseball movies. I didn't need—" She stopped, started again. "I didn't marry you for money." "I know," I said. "I think I always knew. I was afraid anyway." She got up, went to the refrigerator, stood there for a moment with the door open like she was looking for something she couldn't name. Then she closed it and came back to the table and sat down and took my hands. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Okay. Tell me what happens now." Leonard received Philip's letter on a Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon he had called Judith 4 times, which she let go to voicemail, and left one message for me that said, with extraordinary restraint, that he would appreciate a conversation at my earliest convenience. I called him back Friday morning. Thomas. His voice had a quality I had never heard in it before. Not warmth exactly, but something. A recalibration. "Leonard." A pause. "I was not aware," he said carefully, "of the extent of your involvement with the company." "I know," I said. "How long?" "Since '84. Another pause. "Longer. That's before you and Judith." "Yes." "You never said anything." "No." "Why?" I thought about how to say it. "Because I wanted what I had," I said. "My life with Judith. My kids. Sunday mornings, I didn't want to be your equal at the table, Leonard. I wanted to be her husband. That was enough for me." He was quiet for a long time. He started. "I know how it sounds," I said. "No," he said slowly. "No, I was going to say, that's not something I understand. But I think I believe you." The shareholder meeting was held in April. Warren did not become CEO. The board voted, with my proxy as the deciding factor, to bring in an outside chief executive, a woman named Dr. Patricia Hensley, who had spent 20 years running regional hospital networks and had twice turned around facilities that were hemorrhaging money. Leonard was consulted throughout the process. He did not love the outcome, but he accepted it. What I asked for in return was simple. 3 things. First, a formal endowment for the nursing staff development program at each Caldwell facility, something Judith had suggested years ago and been ignored. $4 million seeded from my share of that year's dividend distribution. Second, a board seat held in trust for James, my son, if he chose to use it when he was ready. He's 31 now. He might want it. He might not. That's his decision. Third, nothing. I didn't want a new office. I didn't want my name on a building. I didn't want a formal acknowledgement or a press release or a dinner in my honor. I wanted to go back to Evanston and walk to the lake in the morning with Judith and Bucket, and read on the porch in the afternoon and burn eggs on Sunday. Leonard and I have dinner now maybe 4 times a year. It is different, not warm in the way I once would have wanted it to be. He is who he is, and he's 79, and some things don't change in a man that late. But he looks at me now. Actually looks at me now. Actually looks like he's trying to figure out how he missed what was in front of him for 30 years. I don't have a satisfying answer for him. Partly it was me. I kept myself hidden, but partly it was him. He knew what a man was worth by what the man showed him. I never showed him anything. Last Thanksgiving, after dinner, he found me in the kitchen doing dishes. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said, "You know, when Judith was 8 years old, she found a box turtle in the backyard. Kept it for a summer. She named it after you-know-who." "After who?" I said. "Nobody famous," he said. "Some name she made up. Treated that turtle like it was the most important thing in the world." He paused. "She always did know something was worth holding on to before anyone else could see it." He went back to the dining room. I stood there with the dish towel in my hands for a long moment. Outside, through the kitchen window, I could see the snow coming down over the lawn. Judith was on the back porch with our daughter Patrice, both of them wrapped in coats, pointing at something in the dark, a light across the lake, or a constellation, or something only the two of them could see. They were laughing. 38 years, a leaky gutter, a cracked mirror, a dog that cannot walk in a straight line. I would not have traded one morning of it for everything in that building on the 42nd floor. That is the only thing, in the end, that I was ever completely sure of. I still think about that kitchen. The dish towel in my hands, the snow coming down outside, and Leonard standing in the doorway trying to say something that didn't come naturally to him. What strikes me now, looking back across 64 years, is how much of life comes down to what you choose to carry quietly and what you choose to put down. I carried that secret for 38 years. Not out of strategy, not out of strategy, not out of some long game I was playing. I carried it because I was afraid of losing the one thing that felt completely honest, the way Judith looked at me when she didn't know anything about the money. That look was worth more to me than the steak ever was. People sometimes ask, when they hear a story like this where the lesson is, they want a clean sentence, something they can write down. I don't have one of those. What I have is this. Leonard spent 30 years dismissing me because he measured men by what they showed him. I spent 30 years letting him. We were both wrong in our own way. His error came from pride, the assumption that wealth announces itself, that a man of substance would never choose to live quietly in Evanston with a cracked mirror and a dog that walks sideways. My error came from fear, the assumption that being truly known was a risk I couldn't afford. The thing about fear is that it makes you smaller than you are, and the thing about pride is that it makes you blind. Leonard and I were, in different ways, both hiding. He hid behind the certainty that he understood people. I hid behind the belief that love was fragile. Neither of us was right. What I've come to believe, and I say this not as a man who has figured anything out, but as a man who has simply lived long enough to watch things unfold, is that the qualities that actually hold a life together are quieter than people expect. Doing right by people when no one is watching, that's not a virtue you perform. It's a habit you build, one small decision at a time, over decades. I gave $4 million to nursing staff development not because I wanted credit, but because Judith had suggested it years before and been ignored, and it was right. The rightness of it was its own reason. And then there's the matter of patience. Real patience, not resignation. I watched Caldwell Medical for 38 years. I believed in something before it was obvious to believe in. James, my son, may take that board seat someday, or he may not. That's his. I built it and let it go. That's the only way you can give someone something real, without the strings attached. The hardest part, honestly, was telling Judith. Not because I feared her anger. Her anger I could have handled. I feared the possibility that she'd think the whole thing had been a deception. That 38 years had been something other than what they were. She called me an idiot, which was accurate, and then she took my hands across the kitchen table and that was that. 38 years, 2 kids, a dog named Bucket, a gutter that still leaks. I think that's what a life is actually, not the number on a valuation report, the table you sat at long enough that it knows the shape of your elbows. I wouldn't trade a morning of it.